Rather than replace the top steering shaft bearing, I found a method that may fix it temporarily. I have removed the top steering column bearing block. The bearing block runs there. It looks like this. The 2 bolts go through into this top steel member. The bolts are about 4 inches long. They have got secure nuts in behind there, and then there's cotter pins on them. Now I've taken that off, and in front of that there's the bracket that the wiring goes through, and the horn goes on the top of this as well. I've taken that off. This is actually the second Coorong parts bike that had blue plastic on it originally, and I was hoping that this top bearing block on this bike was in good condition to replace one that I've taken off my 94 bike. I've got the 94 bike one around the steering column, which is the same diameter down here as it is up there. It's rusted up there and difficult to get to, but if I can get my hand in there, this you can see how much wobble is in that block there. Not a lot side to side, but quite a bit front to back. This one here is actually the bad one, the worst one. This is the one off the 94 bike, and it flops quite a lot of distance this way and a little bit the other way as well. But the amount of movement there, you can certainly feel that in the handlebars when that can flog around as much as that on the shaft. That one flogs around as well, but not as much. It's certainly not as much side to side. But they're both well worn. These steering bearings that go at the top of the steering column there, just below the handlebars, 2 identical pieces that are keyed together. There are little like roll pins, and the larger spacer pin, there's a cross which is supposed to hold grease. I think that one there shows the wear where the crossing is almost worn away down this end. I may try one half of one of these with the other half of the other one to see whether I get a better fit. I don't know whether that's showing on the video, but there's still clock in that top bearing, even though I've chosen the better parts of 2 bearings to make up this top one, and I can still feel a clock in it. I think there might be about 0.5 millimetre or more still in it. I'm going to try shimming it with some brass. I've got a piece of thin brass shim here. I think in the calipers it was only measuring 0.1 of a millimetre thick. I've cut a strip 30 millimetres wide, or just over 30 millimetres wide, and about 85 millimetres long, and I've lay it inside that steering bearing. It's got a little bit of a flangey type thing on one end that is pushed out of shape a little bit when I've tried to roll it around in there. I'm going to try that on the steering column, grease the unit up, and that must take at least 0.2 of a millimetre out of the slop that I'm still feeling in the steering column. I'm going to see how that goes. So I've got that piece of brass wrapped around the steering shaft. Being light gauge, it had no problem bending around. I've got the rubber washers top and bottom. I've got grease between the bearing plastic and the brass, and between the brass and the steering shaft, so I don't know which one is going to turn on what. I don't think it matters too much. I don't think the brass can work its way out if those rubbers stay in place. So I'm going to put the other half of the bracket on now. I'm going to grease up the inside. The brass is greased up inside between the brass and the shaft, and now I'm going to put grease between the top part of the bracket and the brass bush and see how that goes. So I haven't put the wire clip or the horn bracket behind these, but those spaces underneath these bolts have let me tighten those up, and to get a feel for what that's like with the brass shim in there. And I can tell you, it feels bloody good. I'm not getting any perceptible movement now in that bearing. So that's better than I actually expected. I actually thought that shim might have been a little bit thin, but it really feels good. So I'm going to now release these bolts and put those wire brackets and things back on there, and the job's done except for the cotter pin in behind. I think I've got some little R-clips that I've used, which are easier to fit than cotter pins. I think I've resolved that problem. I've got these R-clips to replace the cotter pins that normally fit in on the back of those two screws that hold that bearing back. The reason they have a safety clip is it's a steering component along with braking components. It's like a boots and braces if the nut comes loose. These I'll slip those in, and this steering job will be completed. That's those two R-clips fitted on the rear of those bolts. Those holes in those bolts normally have cotter pins through them, but R-clips are easier to fit and remove. So just to finish, I'm not getting any forward to rear clunk in the steering now that shim's fitted. It feels really good. I think on this bike it's gone from it felt like 2 millimeters to, with the changed bearing from the spares bike that probably hasn't done as many miles, it had swapped it back to less than 1 millimeter, possibly only 0.5 millimeter, but you'd still feel it. And now with that shim around there, there's no detectable play in it at all, which is great. My Suzuki dealer still lists that bearing block at $35 for each half. Get out to your shed and have some fun.